I've been working on something that's going to show how these printing anomalies, or what some think are printing mistakes, in Shakespeare's sonnets lead to names and information about the people who were part of the Shakespeare story. That story happens to be the same that's told in the sonnet's dedication grid, explained by Alexander Waugh in part 2 of his video Where is Shakespeare Really Buried, and other videos of Waugh's, and the portrait The Two Most Noble Henrys of Henry de Vere and Henry Wriothesley. I'll explain where these anomalies in the sonnets lead to in a future video, but right now I want to tell you the meaning of the Speare. One of the mistakes is sonnet 116, misprinted as 119. On the opposite page is an OT rose and cross symbol, which I talk about in the previous video entitled New Vere Shakespeare Authorship Clues, and Trixie the Cat is a rose and cross. Here in the sonnets, the rose cross is followed by capital letters at the start of two opening couplets. The T begins the word the, and the O begins ord. Ord is an Old English word meaning point, beginning, or spear. This isn't some random finding where an O happens to line up over a T. It's part of a message that's read with something found on the opposite page and the misprinted sonnet 116. But that'll be for another time when I explain what the printing anomalies are all about. This symbol, which looks similar to an ankh and is based on the Tauro starogram, has been found several places, sometimes leaning forward like on the frontispiece of the 1611 King James Bible, where it appears 3 times, always interacted with by John the Evangelist, a patron saint of Freemasonry. Again, the ord means the spear, and some genius, Edward de Vere or Francis Bacon, chose this word because it represents everything responsible for the works of William Shakespeare. Alexander Waugh showed how the message God and Vere is found on the cover of the sonnets. Later I figured out that it's a 3-part message that repeats 3 times: God, Gold Rosy Cross, and Edward de Vere, which I explain in the video Fiat Lux and the 4th T. In the same video, I explain how these anomalous dots or points in the William Astley edition of the sonnets lead to the message God, Let There Be Light, Gold Rosy Cross, which also appears 3 times. And I show how the misshapen 2T initials in the dedication grid were printed so as to resemble a Greek gamma, or letter G, and a lowercase r. Altogether, they're initials for God, Gold Rosy Cross, and 4T, a reference to Edward de Vere I learned about from Waugh's videos. Not only does the ord or the spear stand for the exact same things that are found in those messages, God, Edward de Vere, and the Golden Rosy Cross, but it's also a spear of light and more. I'll break it down now. Initially, I thought the letters spelling ord could be divided up, like the letters OD spelling odd, meaning God, found in Shakespeare's plays Twelfth Night and As You Like It, and how the letter R is equal to 17, Edward de Vere's Earl number. The letters OR, or, spell the French word for gold. Ro is the Greek letter R for rose, and rod is a variant of rood, meaning a crucifix or cross. The thing is, even though I was right in that the ord does stand for God, Oxford, and Golden Rosy Cross, I was wrong about finding the words the way I did. To play this game, the word ord can't be separated into 1 or 2 letters. Instead, all 3 letters of the word ord are used for each thing it references, which is pretty incredible. Here's how it works. The letters of the ord are an anagram of several words, most of which are found in the Oxford English Dictionary, and the words in additional languages are on other websites. One word is ODR, pronounced odor. This, as well as the shorter odd, meaning God, found in Shakespeare's plays, are the anglicized spellings of a Norse god who appeared in poems from around the time as Amleth, the character who Shakespeare's Hamlet was based on. The poems are said to have been fairly unknown outside of Iceland until the mid-17th century, but there's a difference between fairly unknown and completely unknown, and fragments of Norse poems appeared in sagas in England in the 13th and 14th centuries. And in the late 16th century, during Shakespeare's time, manuscripts containing Eddic poems were mentioned in Germany. Even if the author of Shakespeare wasn't familiar at all with the poems, obviously he knew of the name Odd, the shortened version of Oder, because he included it in his plays. In Twelfth Night he uses Odd's Lifelings, and in As You Like It, Odd's My Little Life, which means, by God, my dear life, or God, save my life. For it to be in the plays, Shakespeare had to know this name, but he didn't have to know or have read the poems. All he had to know or have read was that there was a god who went by the name Odur and Od. At some point, Odur became the husband of Freya, but some scholars believe that earlier he was the same figure as Odin, the Allfather, and in a Christian sense, that's God. The name Odur can mean divine madness, inspiration, mind, and wit, and it can also refer to song and poetry. We don't know if Shakespeare or De Vere and Bacon were aware of this, but they did know the name because it appears in the work. Another anagram of Ord is D-O-R, which is the word that deer comes from, but dor is also the Old English word meaning any beast, usually a four-footed animal or a quadruped. In the Bible, there's a word in Hebrew, yakmor, that's sometimes translated as fallow deer and sometimes as wild ox. And biblically speaking, a beast is any four-footed animal which can be used for labor, food, or sport. An ox is a four-footed beast used for labor, and going by the original definition of the word, a door can be an ox. In the previous video, I explained how four in Dutch and German is Vere, and since a door is usually a four-footed animal, there may be an additional hint at the name Vere hidden within the word's meaning. Whether or not that's the case, a door can be an ox, which was a nickname for Oxford, Edward de Vere. Pronounce the word door in French, and it means of gold or golden. Ord is also an anagram of R-O-D. If you look on the Oxford English Dictionary website, you'll see that rod is a variant of red, designating the color of blood, a ruby, which is the color of a rose, and so on. Also, in Greek, the letter R is spelled R-H-O, but in English, it's simply R-O. In addition to rod, there's road, which is the Greek prefix derived from rhodon, meaning rose. Whether it's for red or road, the letters R-O-D stand for rose. And like I mentioned earlier, rod is also a variant of rood, which is a crucifix or cross. The word Ord is an anagram for everything I've shown in the sonnet messages. God, a four-footed beast, which can be an ox, a reference to Oxford, and golden rosy cross. The Ord is also comprised of light. References to light show up in the three-time repeating sonnet messages found in the verse, God, let there be light, golden rosy cross. In both Hebrew and Aramaic, the word for light is or, the same as the French word for gold. Hebrew and Aramaic are closely related, except that Hebrew was primarily used for religious texts and by the elite, and Aramaic was the everyday language the people of the region used. In both Hebrew and Aramaic, the letter D, or dalet, means door, but in Aramaic it was used as a prefix meaning of or from. I think the intention of the person or people responsible for Shakespeare is that D or dalet or translates in English to of or from light. Another idea I have is if we go with the Hebrew meaning of dalet, which is door, the same as the Aramaic, it can signify a passageway from one state to another, followed by the word or, meaning light. Can dalet or D or be interpreted as a way of saying fiat lux, where there's a transition from a state of darkness in Genesis chapter 1 verse 2 to light in verse 3. Maybe someone who knows more about Hebrew can offer their opinion on that. The reason why I'm going on about the Ord being a spear of light is because the goddess Pallas Athena had a spear which didn't emit light, but as Peter Dawkins writes in his book Arcadia, the spear signifies the power of bestowing illumination upon others. In Shakespeare's Twelfth Night, Feste the Clown says, "There is no darkness but ignorance, and I think the purpose of the ord or spear is to shine light on that darkness. Fellow researcher Patrick Jennings and I keep finding references to both Edward de Vere and Francis Bacon together in the first folio, the sonnets, and earlier poems. Feste is a clown or fool, but this character is very wise. After he begins speaking, I notice there are 17 characters before he says, "I say there is no darkness but ignorance," which is followed by 4 T's. As we learned from Alexander Waugh, 174T is Edward de Vere's number. On the same line as the 4 T's, 33 characters follow what Festus says about there being no darkness but ignorance. 33 is Francis Bacon's number, equivalent to the letters of his name, Bacon. I know the Oxford and Bacon camps don't like hearing that both of them were involved in the works of Shakespeare, but time and time again, within the same code or message, we're finding their numbers, their names, initials of their names, or words referring to the two of them. It's something that Oxford and Bacon code researchers have overlooked. They'll find the number of or reference to their author and completely miss the same information pertaining to the other author found on the same page or within the same code. In another video, I'll go over more examples of what I'm talking about, like how the folio's Droeshout portrait of William Shakespeare conceals the numbers 1740 and 33, and how the Marshall portrait, from the second edition of the Sonnets and based on the earlier folio engraving, also conceals 174T and the number 33. Speaking of de Vere and Bacon's numbers, if you're familiar with the work of Alexander Waugh, you know the number 1740 is associated with Edward de Vere. The letters spelling ord are an O, which is written the same as a 0. The letter R is the gematria equivalent of 17, and D is equal to 4. In addition to everything else I just went over, the letters spelling ord are an anagram of 1740, or 1740, Oxford's number. Now, as interesting as I found that, it gets more interesting when we arrange the letters in the same order as 1740. Putting everything in the order of 1740, the letters spell RDO, which can be pronounced Ardo. Ardo is a word in both Italian and Spanish meaning I burn, and burn means of fire or to consume by fire. In Old English, a variant of fire was Vere, V-I-R. Also, burn is a variant of burn spelled B-E-R-N-E, which is defined as a hero or a man of valor, and in later use, burn was one of the many words used for man, and in Latin, man used to be Vere, V-I-R. So there are connections to Ardo, meaning I burn, in the word Vere, either through burn meaning of fire, Vere in Old English, or burn meaning man, which used to be Vere in Latin. I is short for ipse meaning himself, so 1740, or Ardo, I burn, can translate to I or ipse Vere. Vere is a homophone of the name Vere, so 1740 is Vere himself, meaning Edward Vere, which makes sense because 1740 is his number, and now part of the ord. In addition to 1740, Oxford's number, when we apply gematria to the letters of the OT Rosencross, the O is equal to 14 and the T is equal to 19, totaling 33, Bacon's number. Also apply gematria to all the letters spelling the ord, and they add up to 67, the same number that's equal to letters spelling Francis. We keep finding Edward de Vere and Francis Bacon's numbers together, and the ord with the Rosencross is another example. It's difficult to believe that all of this is a coincidence, and if I can figure out that these words translate to everything I'm showing here, I have no doubt that the brightest minds of the Elizabethan era could do the same. If anyone else has found the ord in the sonnets, congratulations. To my knowledge, however, no one has found it with this Rosencross symbol and presented the ord to be everything, a spear of light, God, Oxford, and the Golden Rosy Cross. Also, the letters spelling RDO are equal to 1740, and tell us that it's the number of Edward de Vere himself. And the ord equals 67, the same as the name Francis, with the OT Rosencross equal to 33, the same value as Bacon. There was a spear of light belonging to a god of Irish mythology, but I think we know we're talking about the spear of Pallas Athena, the goddess who, to borrow a quote from the Francis Bacon Research Trust, shakes her spear of inspiring light at the dragons of ignorance and vice to inspire them with the wisdom to think and do better. The mind of the reader of William Shakespeare's work is illuminated by the ord, the light spear of God, Edward de Vere, the Golden Rosy Cross, and Francis Bacon. That is the purpose and meaning of the spear. I've already covered the dot printing anomalies in the video Fiat Lux in the 4th T, but there are 4 remaining anomalies. The missing sonnet number 1, the extra line added to the right side of the 6 from sonnet number 36 found in the William Astley edition and missing from the John Wright, the 3-looking character in sonnet 63, which is actually scribal abbreviation, and sonnet 116 misprinted as 119. These are not printing mistakes, but instead lead to clues that tell us about Edward de Vere's illegitimate bloodline. I'll have everything posted when I can, so click the notification bell if you want to know when that happens. Or when I post more examples of Edward de Vere and Francis Bacon working together as two. As always, thanks to Alexander Waugh, and to Patrick Jennings, Chris Johnson, Ron Raffel, and others, and to you for watching.